Welcome to Men Pursuing More, the podcast for men seeking purpose, growth, and fulfillment. I'm your host, Roger Maupin. In this July, we're stepping into a powerful series that honors the courageous men who paid a price in battle, yet refuse to be defined by their wounds. This month, Men Pursuing More proudly features Wounded Combat Veterans Month, a special tribute to warriors who face the horrors of combat and come home with scars, but not without strength. Their bodies may carry the weight of war, but their spirit unshaken. Wounded in combat, unshaken in purpose. These are the men redefining strength, not just for themselves, but for all of us. You'll hear stories of grit, faith, brotherhood, and the relentless pursuit of purpose on the other side of pain. From the battlefields to civilian life, these men continue to fight, to lead, to grow, and to live with impact. Their stories will challenge you, inspire you, and remind you of the strength that lies in never giving up. If you're ready to walk alongside some of the toughest men alive, men who have every reason to quit but choose to rise, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now and join us for this powerful July series. This is Men Pursuing More, and this month, it's about honor. It's about healing. It's about heroes. Hey, welcome back to Men Pursuing More. I am your host, Roger Maupin. And today I'm excited to invite Chris Aguilera to the Men Pursuing More podcast to share his story.
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, hey, appreciate it. Appreciate you being on. And Chris, let's get right into your story and just share with the listeners your experience growing up in El Paso, Texas, and some of the successes, but also highlights and challenges along your journey.
Growing up in El Paso, just outside of El Paso City in a little part called Socorro, it wasn't a very wealthy area. Growing up, we didn't have a whole lot, but my parents provided as best they could, and they did a good job. In high school, I was an athlete. I was pretty successful in football for a while, and then track and field. A couple of days before the state track meet, I missed a pad while pole vaulting, and I tore my ACL on my right knee. It was a pretty bad tear. I wasn't able to compete, so I didn't get to finish the state, but I was favored to take it. From there, I realized that I was going to probably have to make some decisions, some tougher decisions than what I wanted to. I had scholarships to San Angelo and some other colleges that were looking at me. Instead, I chose to go into the military. I went through it with a torn ACL and had surgery, and then from there, I was back up on my feet 100%.
So did you have the surgery probably before you went in the military, but
no.
Oh, was actually in the military when you had the surgery?
Yeah, I went through basic and everything with a torn ACL, managed to make it through there without anybody noticing. I did very well, made it all through there. Got to my first duty station, and I started complaining to my doc about my knee. They looked at it, and that's when I actually found out that I really did tear my ACL completely and everything. And so they went in there, did a ACL reconstruction.
So going back to high school, what position did you play in football? I know you played football.
Yeah, defensive end and tight end.
Okay, defensive end and tight end. So you got some size to you, no doubt about that.
6'2". At the time, I think I was 185, 195, 18 years old during my senior year. And so it was fun. I had a lot of fun playing football and everything.
So what about like pole vault? What was your height that you were reaching? And
God, I can't remember. I think I was going upwards of 15 feet. I know that I was at least a foot over everybody else in Texas at the time. And so it was going to be an easy win for me. But after I missed that pad and I popped my knee out, I couldn't even jog. It was bad. So I wound up not even clearing the first height. It was a big turning point for me.
Yeah, that would be and that was kind of the end of your senior year, right?
Yes, sir. That's how it ended.
Oh, wow. And so why, I know you had maybe some scholarship opportunities. Why the military instead of maybe attempting to maybe go on to a college and compete if it's in football or track? Or
I knew I hurt my knee. I didn't know to what extent. but I couldn't run right, and I had a lot of clicking, and my knee was locking up and whatnot. So I know I couldn't compete, and I didn't want to put that burden on my parents. I wanted them to focus on getting my sister through high school and everything. So I just went ahead and chose the military. And military was always on the board as far as one of the possibilities. And to be honest with you, I'm glad I picked it, because even though I was 18, 19 at the time, I don't think I was mature enough to go through college away from my parents and succeed. I really think that the military is what I needed, because of my first supervisor, man, my heart goes out to that guy. He really had to kick me in the butt and point me in the right direction. A lot of mentoring. I got a lot of love for that man. His name was Tech Sergeant Barton. I remember him to this day. The only supervisor that gave me a 4 rating on my EPR throughout my whole career. And he was the most instrumental.
Explain to listeners about a rating, like you talked about, like APR. Can you explain to the listeners about that?
Every year you get evaluated by your first line supervisor. He rates you on a scale of 1 to 5. Obviously, 1 is really bad. You're basically on your way out of the military. 3 is somewhat acceptable. 4 is okay. And 5 is saying that far exceeding. I do know that when I was in, the ratings were a little abused. It seemed like a lot of people were 4s and 5s when they shouldn't have been. But I think they're still working on it. I honestly don't know where they're at right now with the APR system, but throughout my whole career, I got 5s. I was always exceeding. I was always going above and beyond, doing everything I could to get that 5, because my first EPR was a 4. And I remember that.
I appreciate you sharing that, because there's probably a number of listeners who are not sure what APR is or how the ranking is. And so share with the listeners, I know you had many, once you're in the military, the many deployments you had with the Air Force. And then eventually we'll get to your tragic event. Just share with the listeners the number of deployments you had during your time in the Air Force.
I deployed a lot of times. A lot of my deployments were to Saudi Arabia and for Northern Southern Watch and whatnot. I deployed to Spain for Phoenix Scorpion, Afghanistan, Iraq, and then I finished off my career in Africa, Djibouti, Africa.
And for how long, probably listeners are wondering, like, how long would you be deployed? And does it depend on where you're being deployed, or what is to the extent of, like, when you're in the Air Force, how long you're going to be deployed?
So it really depends on what you're doing at the time. So I remember my first deployments, I was with the regular Air Force, and it was only like a 4-month deployment time. There are some people that'll deploy for a 3 or a 2.5 deployments just to cover like cases where they're really short manned, so they just need somebody for 2.5 months. So they'll go there for that and whatnot. But I know every time I was deployed with the Army, attached to the Army and doing either convoy duty or something like that, you can find yourself gone for about 6 months to a year.
So the longest would be like a year?
Yeah. As far as I know, I'm sure there's guys out there that did longer, but in my cases, it was 6 months, 7 months.
If you don't mind sharing with the audience, I know we talked about probably about a week ago about this, but the event in a kind of tragic event in 2010 when your helicopter was shot down, and just share with us just the process of what you went through and just some of the challenges going forward. And I know you had a number of surgeries as well going forward.
Yeah, it's funny. The things that led to 9 June 2010 actually started in, I believe it was 2002 or 2003. I was deployed to Afghanistan. We were headed to a FOB that we were building at the time called TK, Terran Kaut. And we were on the convoy. I was attached to the Army unit, the 82nd, and we were attached with the Afghan National Army. And there were only like 4 or 5 Humvees, and the rest was all ANA, Afghan National Army. And we were making our way to Terran Kaut, and we got ambushed, got hit pretty hard with some VB IEDs. And I remember sitting on the ground, and I was just like, man, there's got to be a better way to do this. And they wouldn't, Army dust-off wouldn't land at the time. They didn't have any weapons on the side. But Air Force combat rescue helicopter did land, pick up critically injured guys and take off. And I remember at the time, I not knowing a whole lot, I asked the Army Sergeant Major why one helicopter landed and the other one didn't. And he's like, Air Force, you didn't know that's That's an Air Force helicopter. That's combat rescue. And I'm like, what? The Air Force has helicopters? I didn't know that. That really started getting me interested in combat rescue and HH-60s and combat rescue. And then, so I had the chance to cross-train. I went ahead and cross-trained, went into combat rescue. And then I was on my first deployment with the 66 out of Nellis. It was us, it was the 58th and 41st, I believe, there. And we're flying out of Camp Bastion. It was our second, could have been our third combat rescue of the day. And it was actually to a place called Fob Jackson. Fob Jackson, originally, Fob Jackson was nothing more than Terran Cow, TK. And so that little thing that we were building turned into a ginormous fob. And so we're flying in there. We're going to pick up a critically injured Marine. It was my two ships turned to spin in. Right away, they're spinning into the LZ to pick up this Marine. When we came in, we came under fire. It was accurate. And right away, they knocked out our tail rotor. So we began to spin out of control. And I remember hearing my pilot calling for an auto rotate. But if we auto rotated at the time, we would have landed right on our two ship, killed our two ship, killed ourselves, and probably some more British Royal Commandos that were on the ground that we were trying to save. So I called for to hold the platform as best I can. And we're spinning pretty fast. I remember the strap was digging into my hand where I was trying to remain in place because the centrifugal force was trying to pull me back and out and to the left. And I could just barely raise my helmet, and I'm looking, and all I see is the ground spinning like as if I'm in a carnival ride times 10. And finally, I see a open poppy field below me, and I call clear to the ground left. And that's when the pilot dumps the collective and dives down to the earth. When you do an auto rotate, you dive down at the earth, and it's a worst case scenario, but we practice it a lot on our emergency procedures stateside. What you do is you dive down to the earth when you have a loss of engines or both engines. And at a certain altitude, you pull the nose up and you let that rotor system, even though it's not powered, you let it basically create like an air bubble beneath you, and it cushions the fall. Then it's just a gentle fall from like 10 to 15 feet. It's a hard landing at that point. The problem was our fuselage was spinning so fast that when my pilot went to pull up on the collective and the cyclic trying to get us to cushion our fall and to slow down, there was nothing there. That rotor system had slowed down dramatically. And so I remember seeing the ground rush up towards me, and that was it. I blacked out. When I did open my eyes, I'm halfway out of the window. My gun is severely bent from where I hit the ground. And I heard one of my teammates crying out for his mother. And I was pretty ashamed that I didn't try to help him out, say some soothing words or anything like that. But I didn't say anything. I just stayed quiet. And when he stopped calling out for his mom, I knew he was dead. And so I'm looking around. My team in the back is dead. I know the guy behind me is dead. And I look up into the cockpit, and my pilots are slumped over the controls. We had hit the ground so hard. We were at like 150 feet, traveling at 120 knots. And so when we hit the ground very hard. Their seats are made to cycle to absorb that impact, but we hit so hard that they bottomed out, and their heads came down on the cyclic, the controller right in front of them, giving them both massive brain injuries. So they're just slumped over the controls, not making a sound. And I'm there, and when we impacted, what happened to me was the engine and transmission of the helicopter tore through the top of the fuselage, and it crushed me and pinned me to the floor. And so I remember I couldn't move my legs, and I couldn't feel my legs too well, but I knew that there was something wrong because I could feel my legs on fire because the fire was breaking out, and then just the heat from the engine not being able to cool off correctly was bad. And so I'm looking around, I'm getting shot at, and I'm returning fire as best as I can. And it was a bad day at work. I'm just waiting to die. And I decided at that point that I'm the last one to in my crew alive. And so I'm going to let this helicopter burn to the ground. I didn't want them to take my body, take me hostage, or take my guys' body. I didn't want them to be on a video where they're being paraded through the city or anything. So my thoughts are, I'm the last one out. I'm going to hit the lights on my way out. I'm going to hold them off as long as possible, let this fire consume us and everything in here, and that'll be it. So I did that for a couple of minutes, and then I eventually it got to the point where I wasn't getting attacked anymore. And so the pain and everything set in, and I passed out. I would later learn that because of everything crashing on top of me, I broke my leg in 3 parts, my femur, I broke my hip, broke my back in 5 spots, 4 broken ribs, sternum, collarbone, jaw. I had a brain injury as well from where my head hit the windowsill. I had a punctured lung, and my legs weren't fired, and I was surrounded by the enemy. I was in real bad shape. And I remember smelling the smoke, smelling my skin on fire, tasting the blood in my mouth, and I was ready to die. But at the same time, after I accepted that I was going to die, I found tremendous peace. It was so peaceful. There was no worries, there was no hunger, there was no sorrow. I just accepted it, and it was beautiful. But eventually, the blood loss and the fire and the pain, I passed out, and I wake up to the sound of footsteps coming towards me. And I'm like, man, not again. They're getting ready to take me now. I can't find my M16 or my M4, I'm sorry. I don't know where it's at. I think it fell out the window at some point. And so I'm reaching down to my right leg where I had my drop holster with my M9, and I'm getting ready to pull it and defend myself. And my plan was I'm going to fire 7 rounds, and then the last one is going to go in my head. So I'm reaching down there trying to find it, and I'm trying to very slowly look up to see where these guys are that are coming at me. And it was very hard for me to find my gun, and I'll go over that later, but I could not find my handgun on my thigh. And so I'm looking up, and I can't find my weapon, and I'm looking up slowly, and that's when I see my PJs on my 2-ship making their way towards me. And so it was friendly. And I looked up at them, and I stopped reaching for my weapon, and just the look of these guys, you could see the fear, the pain, and the hurt. And you see, we handle dead bodies, we're around dead bodies all the time. You're doing like 10 combat missions a day where you're taking fire, returning fire, picking up dead and wounded and whatnot. And to see them walking up on you, on your situation, and they have that look of just like, what do I do? Where do I go from here? That's a really bad day. So I looked at them and I said, hey guys, I'm alive. And that snapped them out of it, and their training kicked in, and they came over, and I remember them asking me, where are my legs? Where are they in the back? Because everything was a mess in the cabin. And I didn't know what to say, so I just said to the right. And I would later learn that the reason I couldn't find my weapon and I couldn't know where my legs were because I broke my back in some spots, and I couldn't feel my legs at the time. And so they got in there, and I told them right away, I was like, my legs are on fire. Please put them out. And they're hitting me with the fire extinguisher. I think they had to put me out like 3 times. One of them jumped into the cabin, started cutting me out of the debris. The fire had reached the flares, so we had flare and shaft going off. We had ammunition going off. And again, we're surrounded by the enemy. And that's when I started to feel fear again, because there was a chance of survival. And there was also a chance that I might lose some more of my brothers. And I didn't want that. So fear started to kick in again. And it just so happened that when I was like, man, this is really bad, that's when the British Royal Commandos from Fob Jackson had finally made it onto the site. And they set up a perimeter around us. And so now we were secure for the most part. We're still surrounded. But they set up the perimeter, and they managed to get me out. Next thing I know, I'm in the back of a HH-60 on my sister ship, Pedro 6-7. And I open my eyes, and I see the ceiling to the 60. When you're flying and you're doing all these missions, you're always checking back in the cabin, making sure everything's good. passing any information you need from the pilot team to the controllers on the ground, whatever you got to do, but you're always looking into the back. And there were plenty of times when we would have casualties or injured in the back, and they're wide-eyed, they're looking around, they're looking at the ceiling, and I always wondered, I'm like, what's going through their heads at that moment? And when I opened my eyes and I saw that ceiling and I turned to my left and I saw my sister crew, I was like, oh man, instead of doing the saving, now I'm needing to be saved. And I remember reaching for my boots, trying to take them off because it still felt like my legs were on fire. And it was because the leather of my boots were just retaining that heat, cooking my feet. And so I was trying to get my boots off, and I think it was Lucas Ferrari put his hand on my chest, held me down, and then he cut my boot laces and pulled my boots off. And my right foot was pretty much smoked, and my left foot was even worse condition. And so that's bad. But I looked over. I was looking to the left to the crew and to Lucas, and then I looked to my right, and there's two other bodies there. It was the pilot and the co-pilot, Anthony Simone and David Wisniewski. And I'm looking at them, and Lucas is working on them. So that's when I realized that my pilot and my co-pilot had made it. They were unconscious, but they were still alive. So now we're there. Instead of just me, there's 3 survivors. Mm-hmm. There's parts that, like, where I would wake up. I remember being flown into Bastion, asking about David. Where's David? And they couldn't answer me. And then I remember waking up in Landstuhl, Germany, and the nurse was talking to somebody about me, and I couldn't remember too well, but I know she was talking to somebody about me. I think it was one of my guys that was escorting me back to the States. And then before you know it, I wake up in San Antonio, Texas, but I didn't realize what was going on. I was so heavily medicated and put into an induced coma because my burns were so severe and everything. My injuries were so severe, they put me in an induced coma. So when I opened my eyes, the first thing I see is my mom. Right away, I'm like, why is my mom in Afghanistan? And she's, you're not in Afghanistan, you're in Texas. You're in San Antonio, Texas. And then she asked me if I remember what had happened. And I'm like, no, I don't remember what happened. They weren't trying to put any ideas in my head. They just let the memory come back. And that's when I started remembering, hey, we were shot down. I remember everything that had happened. But it was tough. It was very hard. It was a bad day at work. A couple of weeks later, David Wisniewski, his parents realized that he was never going to wake up. His brain injury was so severe that unfortunately they pulled the plug and let his body rest. And his fiance was there at his bedside. It was very heartbreaking. One floor below me was Anthony Simone. He was still in a coma. He wouldn't wake up for another 4 months. And it's just me and Anthony now. Unfortunately, Anthony's brain injury was so severe that he couldn't talk for a long time. He couldn't walk. And even now, the left side of his body is frozen. And he's not the same. It's not the same Tony that I had before.
You were made for more clarity, more confidence, more impact. At Maupin Coaching, I help high school and college athletes master the mental game and guide men into purpose-driven leadership. Grab the sports book, rock that merch coming soon, and step into more at maupincoaching.com. I appreciate you sharing that. I know how hard that has to be. A lot of us don't go through anything like that. We just kind of go to work, we live our lives, raise our kids, and whatever we have going on, but never have really experienced something like that. So I appreciate your willingness, but also just an opportunity to share that. I know it's hard. I can't imagine how hard I've never been in the military. I have uncles, relatives that have been in the military. Some have been in combat, but I appreciate you sharing that. I know it's not an easy thing to share, and then also the loss of some of your brothers that you were with that day. Share with the listeners now as you're going forward. I know you talked about your left side, you call it like the dead foot, and how are you able to stay in the military for the next so many years going forward?
At the time, there weren't many success stories in the Air Force with the guys with amputations going back into active duty and keeping their job. There weren't many at all. And my left leg was burned from my toes all the way up to my knee. My right foot, I already had some amputations on my right foot, so I only have 2 toes there. And every week I was having 2 to 3 surgeries where they were trying to skin graft and save what was left of my left leg and my right foot. And I was in this giant brace to keep my back straight because I broke it in 5 spots. So I'm just trying to get by. I'm just trying to figure stuff out. And I remember like one of my first exercises was just getting that bed to sit up at a high angle and trying to stay awake, not passing out, because I wasn't used to sitting up. I'd been in the prone position for so long. And it was incredibly humbling. You go from this guy that's lifting heavy weights and running all the time to all of a sudden you're in a hospital. You can't go to the restroom. You can't even get up to go to the restroom. You know, they got to roll you over on your side and wipe you and clean you. Nobody's reporting to you. You're a master sergeant, but it's only in title. You're not holding any responsibilities. And now you don't even know if you're going to stay in the Air Force. They don't know if you're going to be able to walk again. They don't know anything. They're playing it day by day, surgery by surgery. You have some successful surgeries and you have some failed surgeries. And it was bad. It was really bad. And I didn't know if I was going to keep my leg. I didn't know what was going on. But eventually, after about 7 to 8 months, I'm finally discharged from the hospital. I had a ton of surgeries there. But they managed to keep my left lower leg alive, but I didn't have any muscle. I didn't have any nerves there or anything. So I'm just essentially walking around with a dead lower leg. It doesn't do anything but slow me down, but it's there. And I knew that if I wanted to stay in, I really had to prove myself. So right away, I paid for a trainer out of pocket and we started running. We started doing push-ups. We did everything we could to get me in shape so that I could. My first goal was passing the Air Force PT program test. And so I got to a point where I was doing a bunch of 5-mile runs, getting it on the record that, hey, I'm running 5 miles in these competitions, so on and so forth. And then the day came from my Air Force PT program. I maxed out sit-ups and push-ups. I did my run in 9 minutes or something, 1.5 miles in 9 minutes. And I think the only place I really got deductions was in my waist. And so I was very happy. So I passed that. And then I had to work to get my wings back. I got that. And then I had to get my combat mission readiness status back to be ready to deploy again. I got that back. And the whole time I'm doing this with this external orthotic acting like a calf muscle. And it was a carbon fiber with some rods and whatnot. And the problem with that was my left lower leg was nothing but skin grafts. Very thin skin, easy to tear. And so the orthotic was just tearing it up left and right. It's either that or I just drag my leg around. So I'm using this orthotic, trying to get around and everything, and I'm making it work. Finally, time comes that we have a deployment coming up, and it's going to be the first combat HH-60 combat rescue squadron in Djibouti, Africa. And I was selected to go there and do that. And I went there with this leg, and I set up the first HH-60 combat rescue squadron over in Djibouti, Africa. I'm very proud of myself. I got my last deployment. I did it on my own 2 feet, what's left of them. But I made sure that that deployment in Afghanistan wasn't my last one. I didn't have any regrets. Unfortunately, the environment over there is dirty and lots of tears and whatnot, and my leg was getting infected and swollen. And it got to the point where I knew I couldn't stay in theater anymore. And we had a guy that we had to escort back to the U.S. anyways, so I just went ahead and volunteered to do it as a first sergeant to escort him back to the States. Came back to the States, I think it was about 30 days early from my deployment. And one of the first things I did was went to the flight dock and I told them, hey, I think I'm done. I think I'm done with this leg. And he said, okay, let's send you back to San Antonio and let's see what they say there. And so I got on a temporary duty assignment over to San Antonio, went over there, talked to my old doctors after 3 years. And I remember I was walking into the hospital and I was very slow because I was dragging this leg around. And a double amputee just flies by me walking into the hospital. And that's when I made the choice. I was like, hey, man, why am I fighting this? My quality of life is declining. Things aren't getting better. I think it's time. So me and the doctor sat down. They looked at my leg. They asked me what I wanted to do. And I was like, I think it's time. I think it's time to go ahead and move on to getting a prosthetic. And that went on from there. We got it done.
And so what is the process, like the rehab going forward, the prosthetic leg? I know I've had, I think August was on here a few weeks ago, and he talked about that a little bit too. But what is the process now once you get a prosthetic leg? What is some of the rehab, and what do you have to go through to strengthen up your leg, and just what kind of rehab do they put you through?
I set myself up for success, right? Before I even had it cut off, I was made sure that my body was in the best shape that I could be in. I was running already and everything. So it's not like I was stuck to a wheelchair and then I had my leg cut off and I got the prosthetic and I started running again. I was already running. I was already in good shape. So I set myself up for success that way. And I got it cut off. And then I remember I went to the Center for the Intrepid, and they got a great team over there. They show you how to walk again, how to adjust your gait properly. And they did great things for me. Occupational health was there too. They helped me try to desensitize my nub as best possible because it was very sensitive and very swollen. And it was an all-day thing that turned into my new job. I would wake up and I'd go to the Center for the Intrepid and we'd start working out. We'd do whatever we had to for that day. And it was good. I think it was about 5 months after that, I did my first half marathon. I think it was a rock and roll-a-thon there in San Antonio. I don't think I would have done that marathon had I ever lost, if I didn't lose my leg, I don't think I would have run that far.
All right, Chris, you were talking about that, just the impact that half a marathon had done on you and just how significant that was going forward. Can you share a little more about that?
Yeah, before I would run, but I only did what I had to so that I could excel in the Air Force. There was nothing ever above and beyond that. And then once I went through everything and the doctors, I remember, like I stated earlier, I couldn't even get up to go to the restroom. Where over in Afghanistan, in my head, which was just a couple of days ago because of the induced coma, the day before I got shot down, I ran 3 miles in the middle of Afghanistan, in the middle of the day, 120-degree heat. But 3 miles was like all I wanted to do, and I had to force myself to do it, and it was just what I had to do. And so when you wake up and you're in a hospital bed and the doctors don't know if you're going to be able to walk again. They don't know how far the amputations are going to go, when it's going to stop, what they can save, what they can't. And you don't even know if you can stay in the Air Force. It's huge. It's your whole life, your whole dreams, everything that you've planned out for the rest of your life after retirement is in this box. And then this tragic event happens and that box gets turned around and emptied. And now you've got an empty box and you don't know what you're going to do. So after I had my amputation, the full amputation, there was I was at the Center for the Intrepid and they're talking about this half marathon. And I remember a bunch of guys, or it was a race, right? I think it was a rock and roll. And there was a full marathon, half marathon, and like a 5-miler. And I'm like, I think I can do the 5 miles, but I'm going to try that half marathon. I never would have volunteered to do that. It would be, never would you have caught me saying, hey, I'm going to do this half marathon. And 5 months after my amputation, I ran my first half marathon. And then it just kept going from there. Kept pushing myself, seeing what I could and couldn't do, and breaking new hurdles and doing fundraisers for TAML, which is that Others May Live Foundation. If I run how many miles I run is how much you'll pay me, $1 a mile, so on and so forth. And one of the last things I did, the last big event fundraisers, was I went to White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, and I did the Bataan Memorial Death March, and that was a full marathon with a 40-pound ruck. And I guess I'm a bit of a jerk because I remember doing the run, and I'm running with this 40-pound ruck and a prosthetic leg, and I'm going through the desert and the sand and whatnot, just and I'm passing people, and every once in a while I'd hear somebody being like, "Oh, my ankle hurts or my knee hurts," or something like that. And I'm like, ankles are overrated as I'm passing them. And it was a bit of a jerk, but I think it motivated them to just get going, finish the race.
And then moving forward, I know you share with the listeners about you participating in the Warrior Games and then also in the Invictus Games.
Yeah, before my amputation, they asked me if I wanted to participate in the Warrior Games and whatnot. And I really wanted to fight it. I didn't want to qualify or identify as being a wounded warrior. I just wanted to be a warrior, still hanging on to being what I was and not who I am. And it was tough. And I remember I woke up in the hospital bed one day and I was in a really bad place. I was really feeling sorry for myself and just miserable. I was stuck in the suck. And a guy by the name of Sam Brown came to my hospital bed. He was burned from head to toe, had way more surgeries than me. And he sat down and we talked. And that was a huge turning point for me, where it was like, you know what? Why am I fighting this? Why am I depressed and miserable, again, stuck in that suck? I need to turn my life around and get better, because no matter how hard I have it, there's always somebody that has it worse and they're doing more than what I'm doing now. And thanks to Sam Brown, I picked myself up and I started doing what I had to. The third floor of the the third floor of the hospital was pretty empty at the time. So I'd get in my wheelchair and I would race around that floor, pushing myself around, just getting a workout as best I could. That progressed to eventually, and I didn't want to be I didn't want to label myself as a wounded warrior. But eventually I went on and I started doing competitions, and I went on to the Warrior Games and won gold plenty of times in different years, and got selected to represent the US in the Invictus Games, the first ever Invictus Games over in London. And it was big. It was very instrumental for me. Unfortunately, I'm not going to get into that, but I stopped doing the Warrior Games and I stopped doing the Invictus Games, and I went ahead and I moved on from that.
Now, what events were you involved in the Warrior Games? I know there's different kind of categories or events
Yeah,
in the
so
Warrior Invictus.
I did the mile run, or the equivalent to it in meters. I did the sprint. I did a shot put, discus, shooting. God, I can't remember everything I was in. Oh, basketball, wheelchair basketball, sitting volleyball. You just try to make yourself as multifaceted as possible. That makes you more valuable. If you're just specialized in one thing, it ain't going to be as good as being a good performer in many things. And thanks to my track and football games, it was easy for me to do, just to push myself hard and become a better athlete.
And the Warrior Games, I know, are played among the armed forces. Like the Air Force has a team, the Army would have a team, and then Invictus Games, they take all branches of the military and then just a select team that's involved in Invictus.
Yes, sir. So you got all four services: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, and the Coast Guards with the Navy. And then you have another team specifically for Special Forces. And then that's for the Warrior Games. And then from there, you go on to the Invictus Games. And it's every U.S. service member, regardless of what department you serve, you'll represent the U.S. at a global level against other nations.
I appreciate you sharing that. And I know there's some others that are on in the month of July that have participated also in the Warrior Games and Invictus Games. And now going forward, share with the listeners about that. Some listeners may know about this, some listeners don't know about this, but share with the listeners about the Homes for Our Troops, I believe it's called, that you've been a part of, and it's really impacted you. And
so I love two huge organizations that I love to represent. One is TOML, That Others May Live. They provide scholarships for the children of fallen Air Force combat rescue personnel. They're pretty huge. My kids' college tuition will be paid for by TOML, and it's a great organization. And another organization that I absolutely love is Homes for Our Troops. Homes for Our Troops spends 90 cents out of every dollar to the troop. The only 10% goes to overhead, staff, and so on and so forth. And the rest, the 90 cents, goes to actually building ADA accessible home for an injured service member. So they gave me my house last year in September, and every part of this house is accessible to me. If I come home and I just cannot walk anymore and I got to get into a wheelchair, I can still go into the mechanic room and work on the water heater. I can go all the way around the house. I can access all electrical panels to check fuses. I can do anything. I can tuck my kids in. I can do whatever I want to in a wheelchair. That's a great part about this home. It's ADA accessible, 100% accessible. It's a beautiful thing. What they do is tremendous. It's huge, just like Tamil. But Homes for Our Troops build houses, and Tamil makes sure that these children who lost their father go on to college and they have good mentorship. So, two great organizations that I absolutely love.
I remember when we talked a few weeks ago, you mentioned something about how NASCAR, like Indy 500 and other organizations like that, are sports that are really involved in. Is it both these organizations, or can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, Tamil has some representation up there as well. Just recently, the Indianapolis 500 reached out. They had their car, they wrapped it up in the Homes for Our Troops advertisement, because Homes for Our Troops, because 90 cents out of the dollar goes back to the service warrior and the family, they can't advertise. They don't have money for advertisement. So they depend on the kindness of others to help get the word and word of mouth to spread the word of this great organization. And so in the Indianapolis 500, one car was actually wrapped up in Homes for Our Troops. And so we got to go over there and look at the car and talk to the driver, and it was amazing. And another, just recently, a NASCAR truck. I don't know what the proper terminology is for it, but they did the same thing. But they specifically targeted a Pedro 6.6. And so all of my service members, my brothers that I lost that day, their names were on that truck, and it had everything about combat rescue on it. It was pretty awesome. I love the fact that they do stuff like that.
Yeah, that's what an honor. What to honor those men, or it might have been women too, but and how like NASCAR and Indy 500, how the audience they draw to that, not just the viewers on, if it's on ESPN or it's on one of the ABC, CBS, or NBC, but also just the amount of people that come to an event like that for a weekend, and to really promote a great cause and an organization like that and what it does for veterans. And as we kind of wrap up, what are some final thoughts that you want to leave with? This is called Men Pursuing More, but we can just say for veterans and others, maybe as they continue the journey. You shared a lot. Those may be struggling, those may be considering going to the military, but just some final thoughts for our listeners.
One thing that I've learned a lot throughout my years, is some of the best advice I've gotten is you don't have to win every argument, and you don't always have to prove that you're right all the time. You don't have to do it. If it serves no purpose and all it's going to do is harm, no need to do it. The other thing I've learned is never to judge yourself by what somebody else is going through. One of the things that breaks my heart is when I have somebody come up to me and they're going through a hard time. They might need a knee replacement or something like that. And they come up to me and they see me, I'll be on the leg press machine and I'll have 1,000 pounds, or I'll be doing back squats with 400 pounds. And they come up to me and they're amazed, and they're just like, wow, it's amazing. You're a huge inspiration and everything. And it's very humbling. But then they put themselves down because they're like going through this, and they're like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. And it reminds me of when Sam Brown came to my bedside and pointed me in the right direction, just talking to me. And I really try to tell them that you can't judge what you're going through by what somebody else went through. It might not be to the same thing. You might not have survived a helicopter crash and surrounded by the enemy while your legs are on fire bad. But if, this is your first surgery that you're going through and it's tough and it's hard, it's still a hurdle. It's something that you're going to have to get stronger at mentally and physically, and you'll only come out stronger. And it's at the time, it may seem tough. It may be overwhelming. And when you compare yourself to somebody else, you're just like, why am I thinking this way? And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. But personally, I don't think anyone should do that. I think you should adjust yourself and prepare yourself for whatever challenge you're coming across. Because at the time, it's probably the biggest thing you'll ever go through. You might have bigger challenges, but at that time, that's the biggest thing you're going through. So prepare yourself for that and don't downplay it. Just prepare yourself for it. Prepare yourself for the challenge and try to beat it up. Try to rise above it.
They always talk about how we're harder on ourselves, and maybe a lot of times people are hard on us. And like part of that, like you talked about, is that comparison, are always comparing, and we kind of overwhelm ourselves with that. And then we're always competing against ourselves, and we tend to be extremely hard on ourselves, and give ourselves some grace and allow people to feed into us, and just in a positive way. The impact of having a community of people just to believe in you. But Chris, I appreciate you sharing your story, and I want to thank you so much for your willingness to share your story. And where can listeners follow you in your story, especially some of those organizations I believe you're a part of? Can you share?
So I'm a pretty private guy. I just have a simple Facebook and Instagram, and I don't do a whole lot. It's just when somebody like you is going out there and putting out the good word for me and my brothers, that I'll break out of my shell. But if they want to, they can punch in that Others May Live Foundation, and they can go and see the great things that they do, raising funds for the children of men that we lost in our career field, putting them through college, providing mentorships, and doing what they have to make sure that these kids are set up for success, since they sacrificed so much. They lost their father, and so that's huge. And then they could also look up Homes for Our Troops and see all the great things they do and who they're building a house for right now. Maybe it's somebody in your community, and you can go and you can see them build. You can help out. You can help out with landscaping. You can do other things, be a fundraiser, and help spread the word, because they don't advertise. They depend on word of mouth. Because like I said, 90 cents out of every dollar goes to the service member.
That's a wrap with Chris Aguilera. And I want to thank you for being part of Men Pursuing More podcast.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for having me.
Hey, thanks for listening to Men Pursuing More podcast. Don't forget to follow us at moppincoaching.com.